Good morning again, everybody. It's good to be with you. We are continuing to this morning our study of that Thursday night, that last night before Jesus' arrest and trial and crucifixion. So we refer to that as Maundy Thursday or the Last Supper, but we're focused on the Thursday night, and this morning's reading comes from Mark chapter 14, starting with verse 27. And Jesus said to them, "You will all become deserters, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go before you to Galilee." Peter said to him, "Even though all become deserters, I will not." Jesus said to him, "Truly I tell you, this day, this very night, before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. But Peter said vehemently, "Even though I must die with you, I will not deny you." And all of them said the same. So let me just set the setting a little bit. Again, it's Thursday night. It's after supper. The immediately preceding verses to the passage I read are the Holy Communion passages that we read last week and we talked about last week. The verse immediately before what I read said this: "When they had sung the hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives." So the context for what I just read, Jesus is with his disciples, no longer in the upper room where they had had dinner, but out at the Mount of Olives. He tells them what's going to happen, part of it anyway. He said, "You're all going to desert me." Remember, he had just washed their feet, all of them. He had just explained the blood and the body, the Holy Communion, the Eucharist that we celebrate. And again, he said to them, "You're all going to be deserters, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered." This is a prophecy from Zechariah that Jesus is repeating to his followers. "But after I am raised up, I will go before you to Galilee." It's like he's saying, y'all are going to desert me, but we're going to meet later in Galilee, okay? Then Peter barges in, typical Peter, not asking for clarity about being raised up or meeting later in Galilee, but defending himself against this accusation that Peter, along with the others, would desert Jesus. There's no further mention, at least in the scripture, of the disciples seeking clarity about what he was talking about this rised up business or meeting later in Galilee. Peter and the others just wanted to defend themselves against Jesus' accusation about desertion. As I said, I know last week, and I probably said before, I have mixed feelings about Peter on this Thursday night. My initial reaction is usually, come on, Peter. You've been with Jesus for 3 years. You haven't figured it out yet? You're still questioning Jesus? And not questioning like, what do you mean? But questioning like, no, I won't. On the other hand, in my more somber moments, I feel like, well, would I have behaved any differently? Probably not. So let's talk about Peter. Let's talk about Peter. Among the first, perhaps the very first of the disciples called by Jesus. There's a great passage in Matthew where it says Jesus is walking along the Sea of Galilee and he sees 2 brothers, Simon, who he later called Peter, and Andrew, out fishing. And he calls out to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." And Simon and Andrew immediately dropped their nets and began following Jesus. This is a story for another day, but imagine Jesus coming to your job and saying, "Quit your job and follow me." It's a remarkable story. I've had a couple of jobs where I would quit in a heartbeat and do anything. I'm not sure that's the context for this. So Peter's part of the 12. It also appears he's part of the 3 which is like Jesus's innermost circle. There's another story, this is in Luke chapter 9, about Jesus went up to the mountaintop and he took with him Peter and James and John. They went up on the mountain to pray, and this is the precursor for the so-called transfiguration, when Jesus takes on this aura and glow and is appearing along with Moses and Elijah. And then a loud voice from the cloud says, "This is my son, my chosen, listen to him." Now again, this is a sermon for another day, but my point is, Jesus wanted Peter and James and John, his innermost circle out of the 12, to be there and witness this amazing divine spectacle. Peter's part of the 12, he's part of the 3. Again, if you grew up going to Sunday school, you know that Peter later walked on water. This takes place right after the feeding of the 5,000. So you know the story of Jesus and the others, the disciples feeding the 5,000 who had gathered to hear what Jesus had to say. After that, Jesus sends the disciples out on the boat across the Sea of Galilee and says, "I'll meet up with you later." Jesus goes up on the mountaintop to pray. And by meeting up with you later, Jesus means, I don't need a boat. I will walk on the water and I will catch up with you. But this is Matthew 14, but when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified, saying, "It's a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Don't be afraid." Peter said, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." Jesus said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and started walking on the water towards Jesus. But when he took his eyes off Jesus and he saw the wind and the waves, he began to sink. Jesus reached out his hand and said, "You have little faith, why do you doubt?" So Peter walked on water. He sank, but he walked on water. Nobody else did. That was Peter. A landmark event in Peter's walk with Jesus is recorded in Matthew chapter 16. Jesus and his followers are in a town called Caesarea Philippi, and they're preaching and teaching. Jesus says to him, again, this is Matthew 16, "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" Son of Man is how Jesus generally referred to himself. "Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" And the disciples said, "Some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, others Jeremiah, or one of the other prophets." Then Jesus said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" And Simon answered, "You're the Messiah, the Son of the living God." At that point in time, Jesus said, "Bless you, Simon, son of Jonah, and I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." So Peter isn't his name. Peter's a nickname. So Peter, Petros, petrified, Peter the rock, the very foundation on which Jesus intends to build his church. We have all these stories about Peter that lead us to the Last Supper. And last week we talked about Jesus washing the disciples' feet and how it appears Peter really didn't get it. At first he says to Jesus, "You'll never wash my feet." I get that. I wouldn't want somebody washing my feet, to be perfectly honest. But when he agrees to have Jesus wash his feet, he says, "Well, don't wash my feet then, wash all of me." Peter didn't get it. Peter did not understand this feet-washing message and metaphor of humility and service. This brings us up to where we are now. For later that night, they're out at the Mount of Olives. Next week, we're going to talk about Jesus' prayer at the Garden of Gethsemane. The Garden of Gethsemane is at the base of the Mount of Olives. And Gethsemane literally means olive press. So There's the historical basis. Later that evening, they've left for dinner, they're at the Mount of Olives, and Jesus said, all of y'all, he was from the south, all of y'all are going to desert me. And Peter said, even though all will desert you, I will not. Jesus said, actually, I tell you this day, this very night, before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. And again, Peter vehemently said, even though I must die with you, I will not deny you. And all of them said the same. Spoiler alert, if you hadn't seen the movie, Peter later, in fact, denies that he knows who Jesus was 3 times before the cock crows twice. We'll talk about the rest of the story in 2 weeks. Here's my point of all this. I believe in an omniscient, all-knowing, omnipotent, all-powerful, loving God. And I think this story helps us see that. Jesus says to the followers, as I read before, after I'm raised up, I'll meet you in Galilee. Jesus knew of the crucifixion, the trial, and the arrest, and even the resurrection that was to come. He had foreknowledge of all of that. The reference to the resurrection alone speaks to at least some strong level of omnipotence. And he had a plan. He had a plan for after the resurrection. Guys, we're all going to meet up in Galilee, okay? Jesus said to Peter, this very night, you're going to deny me 3 times before the cock crows twice. Again, foreknowledge that Peter, his closest friend, the guy he called the rock, the very foundation on which he was going to build his church, was going to deny him. Was going to deny him 3 times, even after Jesus told him that was going to happen. It's like the cops say to the robbers, you're going to rob a bank. And the robber says, no, I won't. And then he, in fact, robs the bank. In an odd way, this is a great message of hope for all of us. Peter's life and faith walk is a crazy roller coaster ride of high highs and low lows. He's the first disciple. He's one of the innermost circle. He's one of the 3. He walks on water. Sure, he sank, but he walked on water. There's a book, perhaps we've talked about it in here before. It's called, If You Want to Walk on Water, You Got to Get Out of the Boat. You don't need to read the book. If you contemplate the title, you got it, okay? The author's point is, and he couch potatoes in slang. We're all couch potatoes at some point in time. Me, especially now during NCAA basketball tournament. The author refers to the guys in the boat who never had the courage to step over the gunwale and walk as boat potatoes. Peter was the only one who wasn't a boat potato. High highs. And then there are some lows. This not understanding Jesus' teaching of humility and service around feet washing. Again, being warned that he would fall short. And then doing it. Again, in a peculiar way, it's a message of hope for all of us. You see, each of us is on a faith walk. For some of us, it's the very core of who we are. For others, we're just exploring. We're just like dipping our toes in the water to see what a faith walk might look like. And that's okay. That's more than okay. In our faith walk, wherever we are on this journey, sometimes things are going great. Sometimes they ain't. Sometimes we feel particularly close to God, and sometimes not so much. The point of this story, I think, at least one of them, is that Jesus said to his absolutely closest followers, y'all are going to desert me. You're going to throw me under the bus. But after I rise from the dead, we're all going to meet up in Galilee. Through this, he says to us, I believe, you're going to mess up. Sometimes you're going to mess up a little bit. Sometimes you're going to mess up bad. But don't worry, we're all going to meet up later. It's going to be okay. Jesus did not say to his closest disciples, you're all going to desert me, and later you're all going to have to do X, Y, and Z to get back on my good side. Jesus does not say that. And that's God's grace. Sure, we need to seek God's forgiveness when we fall short. We need to apologize to those who we wrong, and atone for things we've done that have hurt other people's and have hurt our relationship with God. Of course we do. But we do so knowing that with God, forgiveness sincerely sought is always given. Always given. We're called to worship an all-knowing, all-powerful, loving God, a God who loves us, a God who loves our innermost stuff and loves us anyway. Never doubt that you are loved by God. Jesus loved Peter and the others through all of it and to the end and beyond. The example of his patience and perseverance with Peter and those guys, his closest followers, is an example of the patience and perseverance he shows us. Let us never doubt that we are loved by God, through it all, to the end, and beyond. God is forever calling us to come closer. Christ calls us to himself. Let us give thanks for that and give praise to our everlasting God. Amen.